Imagine this. I'm just trying to spice up a boring day, splashing water in the backyard, when my whole world flips. One second I'm laughing, the next my husband's staring at me like I've betrayed him, and he's not wrong. Then, out of nowhere, my sister shows up after years, whispering secrets that make my blood run cold. What did she mean? What does she know? Stick around. This story's got twists you won't see coming. Hey, before we jump into this tale, drop a comment with where you're tuning in from and hit that subscribe button. Ready? Let's roll. I was standing at the kitchen counter slicing carrots for dinner when I heard footsteps behind me. The warm glow of the evening sun streamed through the window, painting the room in soft oranges and yellows. The smell of fresh basil from the pot on the stove filled the air, and for a moment, I felt totally at peace. This was my spot, my little escape after a long day of juggling work calls and emails. I'd just turned 38 last month, and honestly, I'd gotten pretty good at finding calm in the chaos of everyday life. But then I felt it. Someone watching me. I turned around, and there he was. Jake, my 19-year-old stepson, leaning against the doorway. He's tall, with this mop of messy hair that always looks like he just rolled out of bed. Normally he's got this easygoing vibe, but tonight, his eyes were different. Heavy, like he was carrying something he couldn't say. "Hey, you hungry already?" I asked, tossing him a grin to lighten the mood. I figured he'd laugh or shrug it off like usual, but he didn't. He just stepped closer, his hands fidgeting with the hem of his faded t-shirt. My knife paused mid-slice, and I caught a glimpse of his fingers trembling. Weird, right? Jake's not the nervous type. He's the kid who'd rather crack a joke than let silence hang too long. But there he was, staring at me like I was a puzzle he couldn't figure out. My heart gave a little kick, not because I was scared, but because something in the air shifted. It was like standing on a tightrope, knowing one wrong move could send you tumbling. I set the knife down and wiped my hands on a dish towel, trying to play it cool. "What's up? You look like you've seen a ghost," I said, keeping my tone light. He mumbled something I couldn't catch, maybe about helping with dinner, and then bolted out of the room like he'd just remembered he left the oven on somewhere. I stood there, staring at the spot where he'd been, my mind spinning. What was that? I mean, I've known Jake since he was 16, when I married his dad, Tom. He's always been this goofy, sweet kid who'd rather talk about video games than anything deep. But that look, it stuck with me. I turned back to the counter, picking up the knife again, but my hands weren't as steady as before. The basil smelled stronger now, almost too sharp, and I caught my reflection in the glass door of the oven. My cheeks were a little flushed, my eyes wide, like I'd just run into something I didn't expect. I shook it off, telling myself it was nothing. Maybe he'd had a rough day at college or something. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. There was this tiny spark in my chest, a mix of curiosity and unease, like I'd just opened a door I didn't mean to. Later that night, after Tom got home from work and we all ate dinner together, I kept stealing glances at Jake across the table. He was quiet, poking at his food, avoiding my eyes. Tom didn't notice. He was too busy telling me about some guy at the hardware store who'd tried to return a busted lawnmower. "Can you believe it? Thing looked like it'd been through a war," he said, laughing. I nodded, forcing a smile, but my mind was somewhere else. Jake excused himself early, saying he had homework, and I watched him disappear down the hall. Something was brewing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was part of it, whether I wanted to be or not. I've always prided myself on being the level-headed one in this family. Tom's the practical guy, the one who fixes things. Cars, sinks, you name it. Jake's the dreamer, always chasing some new idea. And me? I'm the glue, the one who keeps us all from spinning out of control. At least, that's what I tell myself. But standing there in the kitchen after dinner, washing dishes while the house settled into its usual quiet, I started wondering if I'd misread everything. Was I imagining things? Or had Jake really looked at me like that? Like I wasn't just his dad's wife, but something else. I dried my hands and leaned against the counter, staring out the window at the backyard. The motion sensor light flicked on, catching a raccoon scurrying across the grass. I chuckled, but it didn't shake the knot in my stomach. I thought about calling out to Jake, asking him flat out what was going on. But what would I even say? Hey kid, why'd you look at me like I'm a stranger? Nah, that'd just make it weirder. Instead, I grabbed a glass of water and headed upstairs, telling myself to let it go. It was just a moment, a blip, nothing more. But as I brushed my teeth that night, I caught my reflection again, this time in the bathroom mirror. My hair was still damp from splashing water on my face, and my eyes looked tired but alive. Too alive, maybe. I thought about Jake's shaky hands, the way he'd stood so close without saying much. It wasn't just teenage awkwardness. I'd seen that from him before, like when he'd bombed a math test or forgotten his lines in the school play. This was different, heavier. And the scariest part? I didn't hate it. I should have, right? I'm his stepmom for crying out loud. But there was this tiny, stupid part of me that felt noticed. Like I still mattered in this house. Like someone had flipped a switch I didn't even know was there. I climbed into bed next to Tom, who was already snoring softly, his arm flung over the pillow. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the house. The fridge downstairs, the creak of the floorboards as Jake moved around his room. I told myself I was overthinking it. People get weird sometimes. It happens. But then I remembered how my heart had jumped when he stepped closer, how I hadn't pulled away. What did that say about me? I'm not some clueless romantic. I've been around the block, built a life with Tom that's steady, predictable. So why was I lying there, replaying that moment like it meant something? By the time I drifted off, I'd convinced myself it was nothing. A glitch in the system. Jake was probably just tired, and I was reading too much into it because, well, I'm me. I overanalyze everything. But when I woke up the next morning, the first thing I thought about was him standing in that doorway, his eyes locked on mine. And I knew, somewhere deep down, that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. So here's the takeaway, folks. Sometimes the smallest moments, the ones you barely notice, can shift everything. I didn't know it then, but that night in the kitchen was the start of something big. Not because I wanted it, but because life doesn't always ask your permission. Stick around because this story's just getting started. What would you have done? Ignored it? Called it out? I'm still figuring that out myself. The next morning, I was in the living room watering my plants when Jake plopped down on the couch, scrolling through his phone. I couldn't stop thinking about last night. His weird vibe in the kitchen, that heavy look in his eyes. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination running wild, but I had to know. So I brushed past him on purpose, letting my elbow graze his shoulder. He flinched like I'd shocked him, his face turning bright red. He darted his eyes away, pretending to be glued to his screen. But I caught it, the way his breath hitched. It hit me like a jolt of caffeine. This wasn't just in my head, something was up, and I was curious. Too curious, maybe. I kept moving, acting like it was no big deal, but my heart was pounding. Oops, sorry, I said, tossing a little tease into my voice. He didn't respond, just sank deeper into the couch, his fingers tapping faster on his phone. I smirked to myself and went back to the plants, but my mind was racing. Why did I do that? I'm 38, married to his dad, Tom, not some teenager playing games. But there was this rush, this tiny thrill like I'd stumbled onto something I wasn't supposed to touch. I didn't want anything crazy, I swear, just to see how he'd react, to figure out what was behind that look from last night. That evening, we were clearing the table after dinner. Tom was in the garage tinkering with his truck, so it was just me and Jake. I grabbed a plate from his side, leaning in closer than I needed to. My arm brushed his, and I felt him tense up. His hand froze mid-stack, and I heard this shaky little sorry. I didn't mean spill out before he cut himself off, like he'd bumped into me by accident. He dropped the dishes in the sink and bolted, leaving me standing there with a half smile I couldn't shake. Didn't mean what? I muttered to myself, rinsing a glass. My pulse was racing and I wasn't sure why. It was like I'd flipped a switch and couldn't find the off button. I'm not clueless. I knew this was flirting with trouble. Jake's my stepson, not some guy I met at a coffee shop. But it wasn't about that. It was the way he reacted. Like I had this power I didn't even know about. I'd been feeling invisible lately. Tom and I were in this comfortable rut, just going through the motions. Work, dinner, sleep, repeat. I wasn't unhappy, but I wasn't exactly alive either. And here was Jake, turning red and tripping over himself because of me. It was dumb, but it made me feel something. Seen, maybe. The next day, I pushed it a little more. He was in the kitchen grabbing a soda, and I walked in to refill my water. I reached past him for the pitcher, letting my hand brush his arm. He froze, his can halfway to his mouth, and I saw his jaw tighten. "You're quiet today," I said, keeping my tone playful. "Something on your mind?" He mumbled, "Nah, just tired," and hightailed it out of there. I laughed under my breath, watching him go. It was like a game now, nothing serious. Just me poking at this weird tension to see what had happened. I told myself it was harmless, that I'd stop if it got too real. But it didn't feel harmless later that night. I was folding laundry in the living room, and Jake came down for a snack. He didn't say anything, just hovered by the fridge, sneaking glances my way. I caught him staring once and held his gaze, raising an eyebrow. "What?" I asked, smirking. His face went pink and he grabbed a bag of chips, muttering, "Nothing," before disappearing upstairs. I sat there, a sock in my hand, feeling this mix of guilt and excitement. What was I doing? This wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was me testing him, testing myself. And I liked it way more than I should have. I started noticing things after that. How he'd get flustered if I stood too close. How his voice got quieter around me. It wasn't all the time, just these little moments that piled up. Like when I asked him to grab a bowl from a high shelf, and our hands brushed as he handed it over. He yanked his arm back like I'd burned him, and I couldn't help but grin. "Relax, Jake, I don't bite," I teased. He forced a laugh, but his eyes said something else. Nervous. Maybe even a little lost. I should have backed off right then, but I didn't. It was too addicting, this feeling of being noticed. Looking back, I can see where I messed up. I wasn't thinking about consequences, just chasing that spark. I told myself it was innocent, that I wasn't crossing any lines. But every time I nudged him, every time I saw him squirm, it pulled me in deeper. I'd lie in bed at night, Tom snoring beside me, and replay those moments. Why did it feel so good to rattle him? Was it just boredom, or was there something else I wasn't admitting to myself? I didn't have answers, but I kept going, like a kid daring herself to step closer to the edge. One afternoon, we were in the backyard. I was weeding the garden, and he was kicking a soccer ball around. I stood up to stretch, wiping dirt off my hands, and caught him watching me. "Need help?" he asked, his voice a little too casual. I shrugged. "Sure, if you're up for it." He came over, and I handed him a trowel, letting my fingers linger on his for a second. He fumbled it, dropping it in the dirt, and I laughed. "You okay there?" I said, keeping it light. He nodded, but his cheeks were red again, and he wouldn't meet my eyes. I felt that rush again, sharp and electric. Here's the thing. I knew I was playing with fire. I'm not dumb. I've seen enough Lifetime movies to know how this could spiral. But I didn't stop. Maybe I thought I could control it, keep it small. Or maybe I just didn't care. Either way, it was building to something, and I wasn't ready to pull the plug. Jake was part of it, sure. But this was about me too. About figuring out why I couldn't let it go. Was I wrong? Probably. Did I feel it then? Not really. All I felt was alive, and that was enough to keep me hooked, for better or worse. I was out back, pinning sheets to the clothesline, when everything flipped upside down. The sun was blazing, sweat trickling down my neck, and I could hear Jake hammering away at that old garden bench Tom's been nagging about forever. It had been a couple days since I'd last messed with him, brushing his arm, teasing him just to see him squirm. I told myself I'd cool it, but the itch was still there, buzzing under my skin. I glanced over at Jake, his shirt sticking to him from the heat, and got an idea. Grinning, I grabbed the hose, aimed it his way, and let it rip. Water sprayed everywhere, soaking him head to toe. He jumped up, yelping, "Hey!" but laughing, shaking his head like a wet dog. I cracked up, dropping the hose, feeling lighter than I had in days. He charged over, dripping, and before I knew it, he was right in front of me. "You're in trouble now," he said, smirking, and I saw that spark in his eyes, the same one from the kitchen that first night. My laugh caught in my throat as he stepped closer, his hand landing on my waist to steady himself. It wasn't a big move, just a quick touch, but it hit me like a lightning bolt, because I realized how clumsy we'd gotten. I froze, the air thick between us, his wet shirt brushing my arm. His fingers lingered for a split second, and I didn't pull away. Our eyes locked, and I swear I forgot how to breathe. Then, creak. The gate swung open, and there was Tom, grocery bag in hand, staring at us like he'd just walked into a bad movie. "What's going on here?" His voice was low, tight, like he was holding back a storm. I stepped back fast, my heart slamming against my ribs. Jake's hand dropped, and he wiped it on his shorts, looking anywhere but at his dad. "Just messing around," I said, forcing a laugh that sounded fake even to me. "I got him with the hose." Tom's eyes flicked between us, hard and unblinking. The bag crinkled in his grip, and I could see his jaw clench. "Messing around?" he repeated, slow, like he was tasting the words. I nodded, too quick, my mouth dry. Jake mumbled something about the bench and shuffled off, leaving me standing there, the wet grass sticking to my sneakers. Tom didn't move. He just stared, and I felt the weight of it, like he could see right through me. "You two looked pretty cozy," he said, his tone sharp enough to cut. My stomach twisted. "It was nothing, Tom, just a joke," I said, but my voice wobbled. He shook his head, short and sharp, and walked past me into the house. The screen door slammed behind him, loud enough to make me flinch. I stood there, the hose still leaking at my feet, and felt the fun drain out of me like water down a sink. What had I done? This wasn't a game anymore. This was real, and I'd dragged us all into it. Inside, the house was dead quiet. Tom was in the kitchen, unpacking groceries with these short, jerky moves, like he was mad at the canned goods. I hovered by the counter, trying to figure out what to say. "Look, it was stupid, okay? I didn't mean anything by it," I started, keeping my voice soft. He didn't look up, just slammed a jar of sauce down harder than he needed to. "Didn't mean anything," he echoed, bitter. "Sure didn't look like nothing." I swallowed hard, my hands twisting the hem of my shirt. "Tom, come on. You know me," I said. But even I wasn't sure what that meant anymore. He finally turned, his eyes locking on mine, and I saw it. Hurt, not just anger. "I thought I did," he said, quiet now, which was worse than yelling. My chest tightened. I opened my mouth to argue, but nothing came out. What could I say? That I'd been poking at Jake for weeks, just to feel something? That it was my fault, not his? Tom grabbed his keys off the counter. "I need some air," he muttered, and he was gone before I could stop him. The truck roared to life outside, and I sank into a chair, my legs shaky. Jake poked his head in a minute later, his hair still damp. "You okay?" he asked, voice small. I shrugged, staring at the table. "I don't know. Are you?" He didn't answer, just leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "I didn't mean to," he started, then stopped, rubbing his neck. "Yeah, me neither," I said, cutting him off. We sat there, the silence heavy, both of us knowing we'd screwed up. I'd pushed too far, and he'd gone along with it. And now Tom was caught in the middle. "We should have stopped this," I said, more to myself than him. He nodded, slow. "Yeah, probably." That night, I couldn't sleep. Tom came back late, crashing in the guest room without a word. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, replaying the backyard in my head. That stupid hose, that dumb laugh. It had felt so innocent in the moment, but it wasn't. I'd been reckless, chasing a thrill I didn't even understand, and now it was blowing up in my face. Was it worth it? The buzz I got from Jake's reactions, that little ego boost? No, not even close. I'd hurt Tom, maybe ruined something good, all because I couldn't leave well enough alone. I thought about talking to Jake, setting things straight. But what would I even say? Hey, let's pretend this never happened. Fat chance. The damage was done, and we both knew it. I'd always told myself I was the steady one, the one who kept this family together. But now I wasn't so sure. Maybe I'd been kidding myself all along. All I knew was, standing there with wet grass under my feet and Tom's eyes burning into me, I'd crossed a line. And there was no going back. After that mess in the backyard, the house turned into a ghost town. Tom started sleeping in the guest room, leaving the bed next to me cold and empty. Jake avoided me like I was contagious, ducking out of rooms the second I walked in. I kept busy, scrubbing counters, folding laundry, anything to dodge the guilt chewing at me. But it didn't work. Every time I caught my reflection in the window or heard Tom's truck pull out, my stomach knotted up. I'd screwed up big time, and the silence was louder than any fight we'd ever had. I missed the old us, the easy laughs, the dumb little routines, but I'd torched it all with that stupid hose stunt. One night, I was elbow deep in dishwater when Jake showed up in the kitchen doorway. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low but steady. I froze, suds dripping off my hands, and nodded. We stepped out to the back porch, the air cool and crisp under a sky full of stars. The old swing creaked as we sat, keeping a safe gap between us. He stared at his sneakers, kicking at a loose board. "I didn't want you and Dad fighting because of me," he said, his words shaky. I sighed, wiping my hands on my jeans. "It's not just you, Jake. I messed up too. I shouldn't have, you know, pushed things." He glanced at me, his eyes tired but honest. "Why did you?" I didn't have a good answer, not one that didn't sound selfish. "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe I liked feeling noticed. It's been a while since I felt that way." He nodded like he got it, and we sat there, the crickets filling the quiet. "We gotta tell Dad something," he said finally. "Not everything, but enough to clear the air." My chest tightened, but he was right. We couldn't keep tiptoeing around like this. "Yeah," I said. "Let's do it together." The next evening, we cornered Tom in the living room. He was flipping through a car magazine, his jaw tight, barely looking up when we walked in. "Tom, can we talk?" I asked, my voice wobbling. He set the magazine down slow, his eyes flicking between us. "Go ahead," he said, flat and cold. I took a breath, diving in. "What you saw out back, it was dumb. I was messing with Jake, splashing him with the hose, and it got out of hand. We didn't mean to upset you." Jake jumped in, his hands stuffed in his pockets. "Yeah, Dad. It was just a stupid moment, I'm sorry." Tom leaned back, crossing his arms. "A stupid moment," he repeated, his tone sharp. "That's what you're calling it?" I nodded fast. "Yeah, I got carried away and it won't happen again." He stared at us, long and hard, like he was trying to spot the lie. My heart pounded. I hated how small I felt under that look. Finally, he sighed, rubbing his face. "I need time to think," he said. "This doesn't just go away." He grabbed his keys and headed out, the door clicking shut behind him. Jake and I exchanged a glance, both of us deflated but relieved. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start. Days passed, and things softened a little. Tom moved back to our room, though he kept his distance. Short talks, no laughs. Jake stopped hiding, even cracked a joke over breakfast one morning. I started feeling like maybe we could stitch this back together, piece by piece. I'd learned something brutal about myself. I'd chased a thrill because I was bored, lonely, whatever you want to call it. It wasn't Jake's fault. He'd just been there, caught up in my dumb game. Telling Tom the truth, even a scrubbed-down version, felt like scraping a wound clean. Painful, but necessary. One night, I was out on the porch again, sipping tea and watching the stars. The swing rocked gently, and I let myself breathe, really breathe, for the first time in weeks. I'd almost lost everything, Tom's trust, this family, over nothing worth keeping. But we were clawing our way back, and that was enough for now. I thought about Jake, how he'd stepped up to face this with me, and Tom, who was still here despite it all. Maybe we'd be okay. Maybe we'd heal. Then the door creaked open behind me. I turned, expecting Tom or Jake, ready to toss out a casual, "Hey!" But it wasn't them. Standing there, silhouetted against the kitchen light, was my sister, Lisa. My tea slipped from my hand, shattering on the wood, hot liquid splashing my legs. I hadn't seen her in years, not since she'd stormed out after a fight with Tom over some petty nonsense. Her hair was shorter, her face harder, but those eyes were the same, sharp, like they could cut glass. She stepped forward, her boots loud against the porch, and smirked. "Miss me, Emma?" she said, her voice dripping with something dark. My mouth went dry. "Lisa, what are you doing here?" She tilted her head, glancing past me into the house. "Heard you've been busy," she said. "Thought I'd drop by, see what's left of this perfect little life you built." My mind raced. She couldn't know about Jake, could she? No way. But the way she looked at me, like she'd been waiting for this, sent ice down my spine. Before I could answer, she leaned in close, her breath hot on my ear. "Tom called me last week, told me everything." And then she laughed. A short, jagged sound that hit me like a punch. I stumbled back, the world tilting as she turned and vanished into the night, leaving me alone with the echo of her words and a truth I never saw coming. If you loved this, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, drop a comment, and pass it along to your buddies. This is an artistic and fictional creation intended for both entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to actual people or events is purely coincidental. Some scenes and dialogues in the video are part of a dramatized performance and incorporate elements of grotesque, satire, and exaggeration. The creator stands against discrimination, violence, and hatred. This channel fully complies with YouTube's policies and does not infringe upon copyright laws.